Thank you, everyone, once again. May I now invite Her Excellency, Dr. Karen-Mae Hill OBE, High Commissioner for Antigua and Barbuda, to give us today's keynote lecture. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me here in Leicester this afternoon. I'm particularly pleased to be back in Leicester because, as you may know, I was a student here in my younger days. And I remember with fondness living in my second year in Putney Road houses and walking across University Road to get to the Faculty of Law for lectures. And it's really fantastic to be back here today. I want to commend also the university for developing this sustainability program and for doing so and advancing these lectures at a time when polarization in the multiplicity of areas is what is marking our societies today. This polarization extends to sovereignty, migration and borders, climate change, and climate finance. Many of you in the room, as Prime Minister Motley would have shared, are acutely aware that in November this year, we will have the annual COP take place, COP 30 in Brazil. And this follows on from an interesting COP that took place 2 years ago in the UAE, where the Loss and Damage Fund was operationalized. And as Prime Minister Motley shared, and I also reiterate, was met with great optimism by Global South member countries. Last year in Baku, Azerbaijan, a step further was taken in deciding at the last minute to capitalize that fund, not with $1 trillion as developing countries would have requested, but with at least $300 billion from developed countries with other sources making up the shortfall. Now, for many of us in the Global South, these meetings are actually important meetings because they allow us to have a space where our voices can be heard. Now, you may be aware as well that in 2024, Antigua and Barbuda became the smallest country to host the United Nations Small States Conference, the UN SIDS conference in May 2024. And from that conference, following the Samoan conference 10 years earlier that produced the Samoan Pathway, we produced the ABAS, the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, a renewed declaration for resilient prosperity. The ABAS, as the Prime Minister of Samoa, who was the then chair of AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States within the UN system, she called the ABAS the guiding light. And I want to actually share her quote with us this afternoon. She said, "The ABAS represents SIDS development aspirations for the next decade. It aligns with the 3 pillars of sustainability development with the means of implementation at its core. SIDS believe that a better world is possible and that we can right our sails and create a world where our resilient prosperity is a reality. The ABAS is our guiding light." Interestingly, in 2026, Antigua and Barbuda will have another honor. We'll be the smallest country to host the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Dates yet to be decided. And I know at CHOGM, Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, the outcomes of the ABAS and COP will be advanced. If you will forgive me for making a comment that may sound a little bit arrogant, I'll make it nonetheless. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, an increasing number of people are skeptical about the value and credibility of these global events. We have to assess these gatherings within the context of where we are in the global discourse. As I shared, there's increasing polarization and skepticism, even about things like net zero, which are characterized by many across our societies as anti-human rhetoric propelled by left-wing hypocritical lunatics. And they add academics as well to that list. And the reality is that when we come to fora like these, we are essentially speaking to like-minded people. We speak the same language. We embrace the same ideology. We speak of existential threats and we embrace it. We speak of the need for loss and damage and we embrace it. It's understood, it's fervently embraced. However, what I am seeing is that we are increasingly losing our populations as we have forgotten or underestimated the importance of bringing the court of public opinion along with us in this journey. And for those of us who are in politics, well, I'm in diplomacy, but there's some politics attached. Populations elect governments. Populations also change governments. I recall listening to a program in LBC just last year, heading to a meeting, when the presenter made the comment that she was amused by the hubris of politicians who think that they, with their ingenuity, can limit global emissions to 1.5% when they can't even organize the collection of garbage bins properly. It struck me that what she was saying was resonating with more and more people. What is also equally true is that for countries in the global south, small island developing states, LDCs, and other vulnerable countries, these threats from climate change are actually existential. These threats have been manifested through more dramatic, intense, and frequent climatic occurrences, from prolonged periods of excessive heat to monster hurricanes that wipe out for us in excess of 100% of GDP in hours. Some recent examples. In 2017, Dominica, our sister island, experienced Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria wiped out 225%. That is $1.37 billion of Dominica's GDP in a matter of hours. Think about what the Climate Fund is collecting at the moment. In my own country of Antigua and Barbuda, we have seen too many hurricanes, even in my lifetime. I remember in 1989 when Hurricane Hugo was going to be bearing down on Antigua and Barbuda. And I was fairly young then, and I thought it was an exciting thing. A hurricane, I had not experienced one before. Hugo was a Category 5 hurricane. And when he left the shores of Antigua and Barbuda, he had destroyed 45% of our homes on Antigua, 70% of the homes on Barbuda, and had caused damage in excess of US $100 million. Then in 1995, just as we were seeking to recover from Hugo, we had Hurricane Lewis, a Category 4, that totaled $150 million in damage. And then in 1998, we had Hurricane Georges that had damage in excess, again, of 50 million. Then in 1999, we had two, Jose and Lenny, both Category 4. Then in 2008, we had Omar. And in 2017, we had Irma and Maria, making the point to show you how frequent and close these climatic events were and the impact of their damage on small, vulnerable states like ours. The ability to access adequate, timely, and predictable climate finance, I want to repeat that, adequate, timely, and predictable climate finance is pivotal not only to adapt and to recover, but to safeguard sustainable development. Yet the current financial system fails and falls far short, especially for us, the most vulnerable countries. As we have heard several times already today, COP29 in Azerbaijan agreed to a new financial pact to raise $300 billion over a period of time for climate finance annually from developed countries. And this money, we're told, is intended to impact developing countries to tackle climate change and its impact. But the reality is that global climate finance flows are small relative to what is needed to address and meet the overall needs for climate transition in developing countries. And I will add to that the priorities of developed countries are very much shaped by geopolitics. And if we look around the world today, we can see where governments and countries are focused on investing their resources, with defense becoming an increasingly important issue. Although defense in isolation leads to migration flows that developed countries then don't know how to treat. I want to share some of the things that we have been working on in the Global South to sort of address this issue of the gap between the needs for us to adapt and to address climate issues. I'll start with the issue of the vulnerability index. As you may know, the current system of climate finance falls far short, as I shared, of the needs needed, despite us being both vulnerable and despite us lacking the resilience we build after huge events. such as a pandemic or a climatic event. We are generally in many SIDS classified as middle or high income. Now, politically, any politician wants to be able to say that my country has been classified as middle and high income. But the other side of that classification is that you no longer become eligible for ODA. You no longer become eligible to access concessional financing. As a matter of fact, you don't even become eligible for debt forgiveness, as Antigua has found out with respect to its Paris Club debt. SIDS have long argued that this classification, informed by GDP per capita, when a few wealthy people move into Antigua and the income is added to the general population pool and divided, that this measure of this classification ignores inherent vulnerabilities and limited resilience of SIDS. I recall that during the pandemic, I had the opportunity to say to a senior UK government official that perhaps for the first time the UK can understand when we say we have had a hurricane, what it feels like to have your almost entire country, except for services that can continue online, pause, shut down, to stop, and there's nothing you can do about it. I often say to audiences like these that when you are a small and developing state and there's a hurricane, like the size of Irma, which is the size of Texas, that you can't drive up to Manchester to escape it. When it hits your London, your island, it hits the entire island. There's nowhere to escape to, except you're going to go live in the water. And so we have to be really aware and understand the idiosyncrasies of small and developing states and why the importance of vulnerability and the capacity for resilience must be understood and advanced. So what has been happening with respect to this MVI, the Multidimensional and Vulnerability Index, in recent years? Our Prime Minister, Gaston Brown, he co-chairs the United Nations High-Level Panel for the MVI alongside the former Prime Minister of Norway, Erna Solberg. And while the international community, including international financial institutions and the MDBs, acknowledge the inadequacy of GDP per capita in capturing the multifaceted development challenges of developing nations, the missing piece of the puzzle has been a reliable and universally accepted measure of vulnerability. So our aim has been over the past decade to construct a new index that would allow vulnerable developing countries to access concessional financing in order to build resiliency and offset the crippling effects of climate change and other external shocks. As I shared, the current index of GDP per capita to define eligibility for concessional financing in ODA leaves us in the SIDS world ineligible for the grants and financing available from international financial institutions required to rebuild our fragile economies. The MVI will provide a more accurate and pragmatic understanding of a country's true vulnerability and development requirements. In 2023, we saw the launch of the high-level group report at the World Bank and IMF meeting in Marrakesh, Morocco in October. The report, the first of its kind, contains a series of recommendations to UN member states on the next step of the MVI, including its use by all stakeholders. The ABAS, which I mentioned before, the Antigua Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, calls for reform of the international financial architecture to address gaps and shortfalls, echoing the Bridgestone initiative championed by the esteemed Prime Minister of Barbados. This reform will facilitate easier access to affordable and concessional financing in three ways. One, by considering how multidimensional vulnerability can be incorporated into existing practices and policies for debt sustainability and development support, including access to concessional financing. Second, expanding multilateral lending to SIDS while maintaining financial sustainability of multilateral development institutions. And three, ensuring representation and participation of small and developing states, as well as other developing countries, in decision-making in global economic and international financial institutions. The naked reality is that development gains are at risk. Without adequate finance, repeated disasters push vulnerable countries into cycles of debt, poverty, and stalled development. And as a result, inequality widens. As wealthier nations can self-finance reliance, poorer states fall further behind. So the first thing that we have sought to do, as I just said, is to advance the MVI, the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. Second is to shine a light on the challenges involved in accessing financing. And I was pleased to hear Prime Minister Mottley also allude to this point. Let's take the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environmental Facility, all of which are lauded as examples of funds from which developing countries and the global south in general can access important financing. These are bureaucratic, they're complex, they have high unrealistic fiduciary standards, they have co-financing requirements that many countries cannot meet, and there's limited technical capacity in small countries like mine to actually fill out the paperwork needed to even access this. The result? Climate finance is slow, it is difficult, it's insufficient, and it delays essential resilience rebuilding. I remember one meeting that our caucus had, our CARICOM caucus had, with the ambassador to the Caribbean from a European country, one of the biggest contributors to the Green Climate Fund. And he made the point when we raised this, that we mustn't see their countries as ATM machines, where you just stick a card in, put a pin in, and get the money out. That this is taxpayers' money, and as such, this taxpayers' money needs to be accounted for. I thought about it and said, yes, that is true, that it needs to be accounted for. But it doesn't have to take an Einstein to access it. But there's also another issue that I think in general, not necessarily about this ambassador, I think is a challenge. It's a challenge of perception. There is a perception that global south countries are inefficient and in some ways not to be trusted with money. I won't use the C word. You know, the other side of the coin about our Caribbean realities is that people tend to associate our successes with sand, sea, and sun. You know, we market sand, sea, and sun. And we do it well. That's why people like to have holidays in the Caribbean. As making it difficult for them to approximate our marketing of sand, sea, and sun paradise with the realities and the needs on the ground in our islands. You know, whenever my friends and colleagues say they're coming to the Antigua to present a lecture, or from the Foreign Office, they're coming down for an event, the first response of colleagues is a snigger. You're going on a holiday, aren't you? And it's both a curse and a blessing. And so we have to do something about how we access development financing in a way that brings the beneficiaries of this financing closer to the heart of those funds. I'll bring a third matter up for your consideration. It is a case before the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, the ITLOS, that Antigua and Barbuda, along with the government of Tuvalu, have advanced under a group called the COSIS, the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change. COSIS was established in October 2021 on the eve of COP Glasgow, and its members are united by a deep connection to and a dependence to marine environment and its resources. COSIS seeks to harness the potential of international law to protect the most climate vulnerable states against existential threats. Its mandate can be described thus: to promote and contribute to the definition, implementation, and progressive development of rules and principles of international law concerning climate change. In this regard, we asked two questions of ITLOS, of the tribunal. Question 1, given climate change's harmful effect on the ocean and the ocean's vital role in the Earth's climate system, what does the Constitution of the Law of the Sea have to say about the climate crisis? And the second question that was asked is this: what are the specific obligations of states parties? As I shared, this is an advisory opinion which was returned just over a year ago, which suggested strongly that there is an obligation on countries to address climate crises to which they have contributed. Our Prime Minister, in addressing the ITLOS, made this statement, and I quote, "It cannot be expected that our peoples will remain silent as their homes are irretrievably destroyed. This is the opening chapter in the struggle to change the conduct of the international community by clarifying the obligation of states to protect the marine environment. We firmly believe that international law is an important part of the equation, that the time has come to speak in terms of legally binding obligations rather than empty promises that go unfulfilled, abandoning people to suffering and destruction." And I encourage all of you to follow that case and its outcomes, where we have sought to make a case in law that there's a binding legal obligation for polluters to pay. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has highlighted some of the groundbreaking work that SIDS have done. I've mentioned the multi-dimensional vulnerability index. I've mentioned the case on ITLAS, the Bridgetown Initiative, the ABAS. And Antonio Guterres said that SIDS have demonstrated strong and principled leadership on climate action and on the capacity to respond to the challenges that we face in the last 3 decades, and have served as the world's conscience in the climate crisis. It is noteworthy that much of the discussion around SIDS is cast in the light of victimhood and pending gloom, and I hope I haven't fallen into that as well. It's swallowed up in the focus over the culpability of countries and companies who are seen as polluters and dirty contributors to climate change. It casts the global south as mere victims, as passengers in an unfolding global drama that is best left to the wealthy and the powerful to resolve. And I accept and I agree that that focus is important and has merit. But what we oftentimes fail to understand and look at is the positive actions of SIDS, like my country, to contribute not only to the global discussions, but to advance often innovative actions to combat climate change. I want to give a few examples really quickly. Let's take Antigua as a country, 100,000 people, if you can even imagine that is a village perhaps somewhere in Leicester. Land size, 442 square kilometers. Ocean space that we own of 110,000 kilometers squared. We operate a Westminster system of government. We are a young democracy. Antigua is just about 43 years old in terms of its political independence and has emerged from 400 years of colonial rule. We are, like many developing countries, highly indebted with an over-reliance on tourism, 60% of GDP, and you can imagine in a pandemic when you have a 60% GDP reliance on tourism, what that means. But we're also the second fastest growing economy in the Caribbean, second only to Guyana, obviously growing because of the vast oil reserves that they found. That's a picture of who Antigua is, yet notwithstanding that, notwithstanding the fact that we are not even contributors of any measure to climate change, to greenhouse gas emissions, we have taken certain steps just to demonstrate that we're not just passengers and victims. Our NDCs, nationally determined contributions, are among the most ambitious, leading to a full electrification of cars, we say, by 2030. We have established at our university campus a Center of Oceanography of the Blue Economy, the COBE, which will seek to research around the Caribbean's relationship with the ocean to inform government policy, including in areas like the sargassum seaweed. Off Antigua's coastline is an island called Redonda, which is mined for guano for many, many years and destroyed as a result of those activities. An island that was rich with endemic flora and fauna. Working with UNEP, but very much led by local environmentalists, we were able to remove feral goats and rats from Redonda and turn it back into an oasis of purity, where within the first 2 years, 15 species of land birds returned to Redonda, and the endemic Redonda ground lizard increased 8-fold. In September of 2023, our government announced that Redonda would become an ecosystem reserve, covering nearly 30,000 hectares of land and sea. That's about 74,000 acres of sea. Significant for us because it's now the largest such project in the Caribbean. I want to share 2 quotes with you with respect to Redonda from 2 of our environmentalists. Karen-Mae Hill, no relation, just a similar name, who says, "This is the largest marine protected area in the Eastern Caribbean. It showcases the amazing work that conservationists and environmentalists can do right here at home." We did the same thing with the Antigua racer snake, which used to be everywhere on the island before human activity drove them to the offshore islands, Great Bird Island and Bird Island, and they were practically extinct. And now those islands are teeming with the racer snake. We are a tourism-based economy, as I would have shared, welcoming over 250,000 overnight visitors per year and 1 million cruise ship tourists every year. And these people want to snorkel, they want to swim. So we've adopted the Green Fins Initiative, becoming the first country in the Caribbean to do so, whereby we teach hotels how to work with their guests to protect the ocean, using reef-safe sunscreens and best practice in interacting with reefs, and so on and so forth. And of course, in 2016, we were the first Caribbean country to completely ban the use of single-use plastic bags and styrofoam products. You cannot find a plastic bag in terms of fossil fuel plastic bags anywhere on Antigua. And I will suggest to any of you, if after my talk you plan to go on vacation, don't take any plastic bags with you. Our Prime Minister, our second Prime Minister, Celeste Bell, or third Prime Minister, my apologies, actually described Antigua and Barbuda as the mouse that roared. He made that statement in relation to a case that we brought at the WTO against the United States government with respect to into offshore gaming. Antigua became the smallest country to take a developed country to the WTO Disputes Resolution Tribunal, and we won. And 20 years on, we still try to work with the US to resolve that victory. But he described our country as the mouse that roared as a result of that victory. I hope you can see from what I would have shared across this presentation that we continue to be in the SIDS world, Prime Minister Motley, my Prime Minister, many other SIDS Prime Ministers and heads, as mice who roar. Our Prime Minister has said about the agenda for change, the ABAS, the Antigua Barbuda agenda for SIDS, that implementing the ABAS is not optional. It is a necessity because the ABAS isn't just a plan. It's a solemn pledge to future generations. We must act now together to fulfill this promise in earnest, as the future of our islands depend on it. So what do I want you to leave with today from this presentation? Innovative finance mechanisms like debt for climate swaps, green blue bonds, and climate insurance schemes offer hope, but require scaling and support. The creation of the Loss and Damage Fund marks a historic recognition of the irreversible harm already caused by climate change. And for countries like mine, Antigua and Barbuda, loss and damage are not abstract future threats. They're present realities, from stronger hurricanes to sea level rise to rising ocean temperatures. And we are pleased to see the Loss and Damage Fund is predicated on a system that is not loans-based, but is focused on grants. The initial pledges, 768 million, are grossly insufficient. And we have to work harder and smarter and faster to unlock the billions needed to seriously address issues of loss and damage. Advocacy must continue, including from institutions like yourself, conducting research and scholarship around sustained and scaled-up funding, simplified fast access to vulnerable states, direct access mechanisms for SIDS and LDCs. Development gains, if we don't do so, are at risk. Without adequate finance, repeated disasters push vulnerable countries into cycles of debt, poverty, and stalled development. Trust in multilateralism is fraying, and failure to deliver on climate finance commitments undermines the credibility of global agreements like the Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030. We need private sector and innovative mechanisms to be mobilized, but we also have to maintain a focus on public grant-based financing. The Global South's voice must remain united. SIDS, LDCs, and other vulnerable groups must collectively push for vulnerability-based access criteria instead of income-based eligibility. We have to insist on sustained, predictable, new and additional climate finance at COP30 and beyond. We must champion the operationalization of anticipatory action and forecast-based finance. We have to push for full operationalization and replenishment of the Loss and Damage Fund, even as we advance the adoption of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index to reshape access rules. Financing climate resilience, in the words of one of our ambassadors at home, is financing development. Without decisive action to deliver adequate climate finance, the SDGs remain a pipe dream, out of reach for much of the Global South. Antigua and Barbuda, as part of the SIDS community and as a member of the Global South, stands ready to lead by example, but the international community must fulfill its obligations, not with sympathy, but with solidarity, ambition, and urgency. I leave you with the words of someone whose work I've come to admire over the years, Prince William and his Earthshot Prize. And he made a statement that I've used now since he made it a few times. And it says, I want to go a step further. I want to actually bring change. And I want to bring people to the table who can do the change if I can't do it. For too long, we haven't done enough to protect the planet for your future. In the next 10 years, we are going to act. We're going to find solutions to repair our planet. Please keep learning, keep demanding change, and don't give up hope. We will rise to these challenges. I hope that you were able to glean something from this presentation. Thank you.